So anyone that's ever bass fished and kept bass in your live well for any period of time knows as soon as you go to clean them out, take those fish out, dump them back, you look in your live well, what is the first thing you notice other than the horrific smell is going to be crayfish sitting at the bottom. Pieces of crayfish, claws, tails, pieces of the skeleton, etc. And instantly what do we all do? We go, man, they are chewing crayfish. And if you're still on the water, that's what you start doing. You start picking up crayfish colored crankbaits, jigs, soft plastics that look like crayfish. You start imitating what you think those fish are eating. And what I really want to talk about today is that all they're eating? Is that what the primary forage is? Are they targeting crayfish? So that's what I want to do today. I want to debunk that mystery, and we're going to get all into that right now. So most of you guys don't know, my background is in fisheries science. I went to Penn State University for fisheries science, and one of the things that we talked about was we had a class where it was introductory to fisheries science. We had a bunch of different classes, and one of the things that we talked about was the digestive tract of a fish. We did a digestive analysis. What we did was we went out on the water and we electrofished a bunch of bass, bluegill, etc. The bigger the fish, the easier it is to get the stomach contents out. And what we would do was we would take big tubes, basically like a turkey baster, and we would suck the stomach contents out of these fish. And we did it to a bunch of different bass. We did it to some pickerel. We did it to some bluegills. Bluegills are extremely difficult, by the way, because they have teeny mouths. But bass were the primary target of our study. We do it to trout a lot too. Anything that really has that bigger digestive tract. But for this, we're going to talk about bass. And largemouth bass in specific, but smallmouth bass, it's also going to count in the same exact thing. Spotted bass too for you guys. And so what you would do is you would wet the tube, you would stick it down the fish's throat, you would suck up the contents, you pull it out, and then we would put it into a tray, and we had this big dish where we had a whole bunch of different fish's stomach contents. And what we would do is we would go through and we would count, okay, here's a crayfish, here's a bait fish, here's, insects, here's random debris, because sometimes fish mistake fake things for real things. We do it all the time, right? And so then we would calculate it up for how many fish we caught, and we would try to get an analysis of what these fish are actually eating. And most times we think those fish are just eating crayfish. But that's really not true. Because bass are opportunistic feeders, they tend to feed on a lot of different things. We just happen to notice the crayfish the most often. And why is that? Real quick, those of you guys that are new to the channel, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button to follow with the content. But let's get right back into why we see crayfish in the live wells. Well, when a largemouth bass or smallmouth bass or spotted bass eats anything, they primarily suck it in, and then if you've ever looked at the back of their throat, they have what's called crushers that really crush the food, and then it goes into their digestive tract. They don't grind it up like we do. They don't do any of that. So their food is basically eaten whole. They just crush it, and those crushers move in a motion that pulls it to the back of their throat. So pretty much everything is fully intact. If you've ever seen a lot of the stuff that fish have eaten, you pull it out, and it's like a full perch. They don't bite it up. They don't chew it up. And so we were getting all kinds of different cool things, and one of the biggest things that we talked about was how their digestive system works. Because I brought it up because I love to bass fish. I was like, why do we always see crayfish? And Professor was like, that is a great point. Let's talk about it. And here's what she had to say. Well, when a fish takes in food, they have stomach acid just like we do that break down what they've eaten. And what you'll notice about a crayfish is it has a hard exoskeleton on it. It's actually made of a material called chitin, which is a form of hard protein. And so unlike everything else, bait fish are super soft, bluegills, super soft. There's nothing really hard on them. Sometimes you get some spines, sometimes you get some bones, but most of the material that is in a bait fish is just soft tissue, and that digests extremely fast. So we don't really notice a lot when they're eating bait fish or anything other type of bait fish or insects, because it digests so quickly that you don't really have a chance to even see it. Versus a crayfish has that hard exoskeleton like I mentioned. So that stuff stays in their stomach for a long period of time because it takes them a long time to digest it. They really don't ever fully digest that material for like weeks on end because it's such hard material. There's still plenty of nutrition in crayfish, but those pieces get left over, and that's why we see those fish spitting up the pieces of crayfish so very often, is because that's just what's left in their stomach. Because of everything else, it digests so fast that we don't ever see it. So they're just digesting what they've had in their stomach, and those pieces of crayfish are just left in there from maybe days and days and days ago. They might have only eaten 3 of these in like a week, but we see all 3 of them, and we think that's just what they've eaten today, when that's really not the case. So we really need to consider what they're eating more. you know, based on what we see in the water system, how those fish are setting up and by how we're catching them versus them just spitting up crayfish, because it really can be misleading. So just like we make mistakes understanding that fish are not always eating crayfish, we also miss a ton of fish on frogs, which is what I recently did a video on. You guys are going to want to check that out up here. But thank you guys so much for watching. God bless every one of you, and I'll see you in the next video.